Chapter 1: Origins and Encounters. Carol Lennox Thompson was born in the early 1930s in Minnesota into a loving, stable, and middle-class family. Raised with traditional values, Carol grew up in an environment that emphasized community, faith, and family. She was known for her kindness, grace, and strength of character, traits that would remain hallmarks of her personality into adulthood. Bright, dependable, and warm-hearted, Carol quickly became known as someone who would do anything for her loved ones. As she matured, she followed a path of homemaking and motherhood, embracing the role with devotion and warmth. T. Eugene Cotton Thompson was born in 1921 in North Dakota. His childhood was more modest and tumultuous than Carol's, shaped by hardship and an intense drive to succeed. Ambitious from a young age, Gene worked hard to rise above his circumstances. He attended law school and began a promising career as an attorney. His charm, intelligence, and confidence made him well-liked in professional circles. But beneath the surface, Gene was deeply preoccupied with status, money, and personal image. Carol met Gene in the late 1940s, shortly after he had begun his legal career. Their meeting was likely typical of the era, introduced by mutual acquaintances or during a community function. Carol was drawn to Gene's ambition and charisma, while Gene saw in Carol the ideal partner, elegant, devoted, and deeply grounded. They married in 1948 and soon settled into a comfortable life in a pleasant neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota. Throughout the 1950s, they built what appeared to be a picture-perfect life. Carol became a full-time homemaker, raising their 4 children with care and devotion. Gene's law practice flourished, and the family gained a solid social standing in their community. However, even early in the marriage, subtle differences in their worldviews emerged. Carol was content with a simple, family-oriented life, while Gene quietly yearned for more wealth, more power, more admiration. These growing cracks in their marriage, hidden beneath smiles and public appearances, would eventually deepen into something far more dangerous. Chapter 2: The Crumbling Facade. By the early 1960s, the polished image of the Thompson household was beginning to show signs of wear. Behind closed doors, Gene was struggling. His legal practice was no longer as successful, and mounting debts began to weigh heavily on him. Rather than scaling back or admitting to financial trouble, Gene doubled down, taking on loans and hiding the reality from his family. His growing desperation was compounded by a fear of public embarrassment and a refusal to compromise his social status. Carol remained largely unaware of the extent of Gene's troubles. Focused on their children and committed to their marriage, she continued to be a supportive partner. But Gene, consumed by ego and anxiety, began to see Carol not as a wife and confidant, but as an obstacle, or, perhaps more chillingly, a potential solution. Around this time, Gene took out a substantial life insurance policy on Carol, raising no alarms at the time, but later understood as the first concrete step toward an unthinkable betrayal. In late 1962 or early 1963, Gene began to explore the possibility of having Carol killed. It was not a crime of passion, but of calculation. He reached out to Norman Mastrian, a former client with criminal ties, to help him find someone who could carry out the murder. Mastrian introduced him to Dick Anderson, a small-time crook who was struggling financially and willing to do nearly anything for money. Gene offered him a few $1,000s and laid out the plan. Make it look like a home invasion gone wrong. As the plan formed, Gene maintained his double life flawlessly. To the outside world, he was still a respected lawyer, husband, and father. Carol remained unaware of the danger surrounding her. In her final weeks, she was still caring for her children, hosting friends, and attending church. Nothing in her demeanor suggested she felt the storm coming. Gene, meanwhile, had set into motion a plot that would destroy not only Carol's life, but the family he claimed to care about. Chapter 3: A Morning of Terror. March 6, 1963, began like any other day in the Thompson household. Gene had gone to work, The children were off to school, and Carol was alone at home. The suburban calm of St. Paul would soon be shattered by an act of unspeakable violence. Dick Anderson, acting on Jean's instructions, entered the Thompson residence that morning. Armed with a gun, a rubber hose, and a knife, Anderson expected a quick job, but the gun misfired. Panicked, Anderson turned to the hose, beating Carol and then attempting to stab her. Carol fought back fiercely, showing a level of resistance and courage that surprised her attacker. The attack became prolonged, frantic, and brutal. Despite sustaining multiple stab wounds and severe head trauma, Carol managed to escape her attacker's grasp. Covered in blood, she fled the house and staggered to a neighbor's doorstep, collapsing just as she reached safety. The neighbor quickly called for help. Paramedics arrived and rushed Carol to the hospital, but it was too late. She died from her injuries shortly after being admitted. Carol's final moments were defined not just by horror, but by resilience. Her effort to survive, to get help, became a key part of the investigation. The crime scene told a story of chaos and cruelty, but also of a woman who refused to die without a fight. The community was stunned. News of Carol's murder spread quickly, and the sheer brutality of the attack left people grasping for answers. Police launched an immediate investigation, suspecting that this was no ordinary robbery. Chapter 4: Justice and Aftermath. The investigation into Carol's murder quickly turned up inconsistencies. There were no significant signs of forced entry or theft, and investigators noted that the crime appeared targeted, not random. As detectives dug deeper, attention turned toward Gene Thompson. His demeanor was oddly emotionless, and his financial records revealed troubling details, including the recent life insurance policy on Carol. A breakthrough came when police identified Norman Mastrian and then Dick Anderson. Under pressure, Anderson confessed to the murder and detailed Gene's role in orchestrating it. Mastrian confirmed the account. With clear evidence linking Gene to the murder-for-hire plot, authorities arrested him. The case shocked the public. How could a respected attorney have plotted the murder of his own wife? Gene Thompson stood trial in 1963 for first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed as the prosecution presented a narrative of cold, calculated betrayal. Gene, they argued, was not a grieving husband, but a man who saw his wife as expendable, a solution to his financial and personal failings. The defense claimed Gene was innocent, blaming the crime solely on Anderson, but the evidence told a different story. In the end, Gene was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. His children, already traumatized by their mother's death, were now left without either parent. Relatives stepped in to raise them. Gene spent more than 50 years behind bars, dying in 2015 at age 88. His legacy was forever stained. Carol Thompson became more than just a victim. Her courage in the face of death, her love for her children, and her fight for survival are remembered to this day. Her story serves as a haunting reminder of how ambition and greed can destroy the most sacred bonds. Justice was served, but the wounds left behind remain etched into Minnesota's history.